Hello everyone, my name is Anton and this is Genealogical project. We specialize in searching for ancestors, reconstruction family history information, finding relatives and historical records about them, as well as creation of family genealogical tree. In this video, I would like to talk about the specific action I took when searching for my relatives, who and where I searched, and whom I managed to find after several years of gathering information. I handled almost all stages of searching for my ancestor independently, so I can describe all the steps. So let's start the investigation. The main person here is my paternal grandfather Anton Laufer. Here are the initial details I had. Fact 1. According to my grandfather's words, passed down to me from my father Mikhail Laufer and my aunt, his sister Alla Laufer, he was born in the village of Lubsza, Zhidachevsky poviat, Stanisławów voivodeship, in Poland, on November 13, 1922. Stanisławów voivodeship was an administrative territorial unit of the Polish Republic in Galicia. This voivodeship bordered Lwów and Ternopil. Unlike neighboring voivodeships, its territory approximately corresponds to the present-day Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast of Ukraine. My grandfather finished school and knew Polish and German languages. In his years, Anton helped his father Semyon with work at the mill, flour production. Fact 2. It was also known that my grandfather Anton was enlisted in the army, and during the Second World War he fought on the territory of the USSR against Nazi Germany. According to my own stories, he took part in the Battle of Stalingrad. By the way, the Battle of Stalingrad would change history and turned the tide of the entire Second World War, listed from July 1942 to February 1943, and ended with a complete victory of the Soviet troops. My grandfather was offered a job in the military office as a translator from German-Polish to Russian, but he refused. After the war, he returned to Lubsza, but unfortunately he did not find any relative there. He worked as a bakery, married Stasenko Ludmila, my grandmother, and moved to the city of Kherson in southern Ukraine, where they had 3 children: Alexander, Mikhail, my father, and Alla. Fact 3. My grandfather didn't talk about his relatives, whether he had brothers or sisters, who his parents were. The only moment my father remembered from 10 years ago was when my grandfather found information in the newspaper Izvestia in the 1978, where supposedly the family of his possible second cousin was looking for him to transfer inheritance. But since our project Genealogical has access to all issues of the Izvestia newspaper, unfortunately, I didn't find such information in the announcements of In Your Collegia through interactive search. I remind you that during Soviet times, In Your Collegia was a subdivision of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the USSR and dealt with issues of inheritance by citizens of the USSR from citizens of the other states. Soviet citizens who read the Izvestia newspaper could familiarize themselves with In Your Collegia announcements about the search for relatives of foreign citizens living in the USSR. By the way, almost all 600 announcements about the search for citizens in the USSR have been added to the Genealogical library website, inside genealogical.tab. Upon arrival in Kherson, my grandfather found a job at a shoe factory and worked there for a long time. My grandmother worked at a press, kiosk selling newspaper and magazines. Conversations about school years, ancestors, as well as relatives abroad were taboo in the family due to fear and possible persecution in the future. After his death in 1982, my aunt Alla tried to uncover the family secret, but unfortunately she couldn't gather any information about him or his parents when she visited the village of Lubsza. I was born in 1985, 3 years after his death. I only saw my grandfather in photo, so all the information for further research I received only from my close relatives. I began my detailed investigation in 2018. The first thing I did was to travel to the birthplace of my grandfather Anton, to the village of Lyubsha, located in the Lviv region of Ukraine. Interestingly, there is also a village called Lubsza in the Ivano-Frankivsk region, and in some genealogical trees of my distant relatives on Guinea and my heritage website, the second Lubsza is indicated, which can be misleading during search. Having arrived in Lubsza, I questioned over 10 elderly locals, but none of them had heard anything about my grandfather Anton or great-grandfather Semyon. I also spoke with employees of the local library and the village council. Someone remembered that head of the collective farm, Mikhail Laufer, a man promised to take me to his grave in the town of Zurawno. And I also visited the neighboring village of Mazurovka. In Zurawno, I visited the local archive, explained whom I was searching for, and together we looked through the church books for the years 1922-1923. There was no information about my relatives in them. Returning from the trip, and glad to have at least some information about my potential relatives, I turned in the wrong direction in subsequent investigations. On the website thefieldsofukraine.com, I found an article about three brothers, Chaim, Joseph and Yakov Laufer. On the same day, I purchased the book on Amazon by author Chaim Tal, which was also titled The Fields of Ukraine. Chaim Tal was born in 1940 in Bucharest, Romania. He survived the Second World War and the Holocaust, hiding with his family in the house of local farmer. In 1950, he repatriated to Israel. It was there that he wrote this book based on the stories of one of the brothers, Joseph Laufer. The book describes their life story and, most importantly, my main clue, my main tip. Chaim Laufer went on the Second World War and no one heard anything more about him. Comparing the following facts, the same last name, coming back from the war and not meeting anyone, Chaim also being from Lubsza. I didn't find any other people with this surname, and there were up to 1,000 people living in the village. I concluded that perhaps Chaim Laufer was my grandfather Anton Laufer. Discrepancies include the fact that Chaim was born in 1925. Their father's name was not Semyon but Kalman, and he did own a mill because he was involved in real estate. Within a few days, I already had contacts with Chaim's son Avner and grandson Joseph, who also lived in Israel. By the way, after Joseph moved in 1950, he opened a bakery, which also gave me a glimmer of hope, as my grandfather also worked at a bakery. After corresponding with Joseph's grandson, I realized that this was a completely different family, and I had no evidence. But something taught me that Anton's name wasn't right, and there were no mentions of his birth in the Zurawno archives. I divided my research into several parts and began directly with military service. In the Russian website Memory of the People, Pamять Народа, I found information about Laufer Anton Semenovich, that he was born in 1922 and he was from Western Ukraine. Besides the marriage certificate with Ludmila Stasenko in Zurawno and the death certificate from Kherson, I practically had nothing. Well, I did have a couple of photos and document about him being awarded during the Second World War. I found mentions of another person with the surname Laufer in this site. This was Laufer Anton Solomonovich. Anton here is an abbreviation of the name, and so is his patronymic abbreviation for Solomonovich. My assumptions were confirmed when I noticed that the case number on the website for these two individuals coincided, and the arrival date at the forwarding point was under the name Anton, while the departure to another military unit was under the name Anton, with only a 5-day difference. So Anton Semenovich is Anton Solomonovich. Well, in any case, this was already better than nothing. From a conversation with my mom a year ago, I suddenly learned that indeed she remembered that during the New Year celebration in the 1980, my grandfather jokingly told her that his name was so difficult to pronounce that the military enlistment office suggested he change it. This was confirmed by my grandmother as well. Yes, she said, mouth can be twisted. Searching for people with names similar to Anton, A-R-D-N, and the surname Laufer across all databases on various websites, including specialized resources where information about birth, marriage, and death of Jewish people can be found, led to nothing. I'm referring to sites like JewishGen, GRI Poland, Gesher, Galicia, and others. But after searching the Yad Vashem database, I found very important information about my grandfather, which completely confirmed the introductory information facts known to me from my parents' words. My grandfather fell under the evacuation law in Stalingrad, and it also states that he was a shoemaker, meaning he worked in the footwear industry, just like he did after moving to Kherson. It is also indicated that at the time of his deportation he was 20 years old, which completely coincides with his days of birth. He was indeed 20 in 1942. Also my aunt, who was practically the only one source of information, confirms that fact. And two more discoveries. The first is his real name is Aaron. The second is his birthplace, Bolechiv, Stanisławów voivodeship, Poland, which is not far from Lubsza. Information about the parents' place of residence in this site is not very clear on the site. I haven't found any populated place like that. Perhaps it's just a mistake. Unfortunately, I haven't encountered any investigations where there were no errors, abbreviation, or even worse, name changes in documents or records. Laufer Aaron Solomonovich is the real name of my grandfather. Accordingly, my great-grandfather was Solomon, an analog of the Jewish name Shlomo. After this discovery, my search went at warp speed. Of course, it was aided by the DNA analysis from my heritage that I did last year. There I found many connections of the third and fourth generation, which helped me directly reach my grandfather's family. On specialized websites that can be used of convenient searches without manually scanning thousands of scanned pages of metric books, I found quite a few tips about my grandfather's father Solomon and his wife, even about his two wives. The first document I noticed was the marriage certificate of my great-grandfather Solomon Laufer and Teuba Brachpis Semel. Also, at the time, I didn't know this for 100%, and for me it was just another namesake, of which there are hundreds, for example in a Facebook search. Of course, theoretically, all people on Earth are relatives, but I would like to start by finding ancestor a few centuries closer to me. So Solomon Laufer, born on April 24, 1886 in Zurawno, son of Abraham and Mikhail Laufer, and farmer from Lubsza, marries Teuba Semel, born on 1st of August 1900 in Tyapche, living in Choszów, daughter of Leah Semel. Pay attention to two important notes. Tauba's father is Kalman Brachpius. The child's surname is indicated according to the mother. As the father was not present when the information was recorded in the metric book, although the parents were not married. Solomon is listed as a widower. Another important point is the date of marriage, December 30, 1920. Since I will find other relatives in the marriage registration book whose wedding was a couple months earlier. Is it Solomon Laufer, Aaron's father, and my great-grandfather? Yes. Having received the DNA analysis results from my heritage, I saw a match of 2 to 3% with two individuals, while our 40,000 people had one matched with me less 1%. One of my cousin Vladimir and his son Oleg turned out to be relatives with the surname Semel and Brachpius. Oleg's great-grandfather Israel was a sibling of my great-grandmother Teuba. We merged our family trees and began joint search for common relatives. I joined a group of relatives with the surname Brachpius and found almost all the information about the ancestors of my great-grandmother Teuba, starting from 1820. Experts in genealogical research often advise to search for information for the end. Very often we find relatives thanks to tips found in the records of our ancestors. So, now I know my grandfather is Aaron Laufer, my great-grandfather Solomon Shlomo Laufer, my great-grandmother Teuba Brachpius, my great-grandfather is Abraham Laufer, and my great-great-grandmother is Malka Heni Laufer. The second name was mentioned in other document and became known. I continue my research. In correspondence with a Job Brachpius, my cousin, I learned that a man named Shalom Pacifico Laufer from Argentina was searching for his relatives from Poland with the help of his acquaintance Alberto. I found Alberto's contact in Buenos Aires in Facebook, and he gave me information about the business owned by Isaac Laufer, Shalom's brother, and the cousin of Aaron. After finding this business in the city of Goya, I wrote to a group of us in the city and found some employees of this textile factory. They helped me find Isaac's son, Marcelo, also from Buenos Aires. I wrote to him in Facebook and learned that he had 6 paternal uncles and 1 aunt, as well as the names of his parents. His grandfather was Joshua Laufer. After that, I found the family tree of all my Argentine relatives on the Genealogical, where it was stated that Joshua Laufer was Shlomo's brother, my great-grandfather. It also mentioned that there were 4 of them: Mordechai, Marcus, Abraham, Joshua, who immigrated to Argentina with his wife Esther, and 7 children in 1940, and Shlomo. They also indicated the surname of my great-grandmother Mikhail Laufer, Axelrad. Later, the surname will also appear in other documents. As a result, I met some cousins from Argentina and added more than 50 descendants of Joshua Laufer to my family tree. Then, on the Gesher Galicia website, I found a record of the marriage in 1910 of a certain Solomon Laufer and Krimshi Kraushar. The name was written slightly differently everywhere. According to Shalom Laufer's letter from a researcher for Argentina, my great-grandfather Solomon had 2 wives and 5 children. 3 girls from the first wife and 2 boys from the second. It is also mentioned that the name of Shlomo's first daughter was Sarah Tal. On the Yad Vashem website, I found records on the deaths of several people in the Holocaust, left by Sarah Tal, who moved to Israel, the stepsister of my grandfather Aaron. She mentioned her father, my great-grandfather Shlomo, her grandfather Abraham. So he is my great-great-grandfather, Jacob Laufer, Aaron's biological brother, and Sarah's stepbrother on her father's side, and her uncle Naftali Kraushar. Remembering that there is a record of the Zurawno archive of the marriage of Solomon Laufer and Krenchi Kraushar, everything fell into place. While browsing record on the MyHeritage website, I found an open family tree that included Sarah Tal Puf Laufer and her husband Joseph Tal. At first, I thought that Sarah had two husbands, the first one with the surname Puf and the second one with the surname Tal, and Laufer was her maiden name, but it was more complicated than I thought. In the Polish archive, I found a record of the marriage between Mikhail Laufer from Lubsza and Zygfryd Puf from Gdansk, who moved to Rehovot, Israel. The parents of Mikhail were mentioned in the record Shlomo Laufer and Malka Axelrod. Perhaps the marriage was registered this way from some special reasons. After all, Shlomo Laufer married for the second time to Tauba in 1920, and his marital status was listed as widower, meaning his first wife, Krenchi Kraushar, had already passed away before 1920. It's unclear, but how to connect Mikhail Laufer with Sarah Tal Laufer? Of course, in immediate assumption that she also changed her name, but first I decided to check and write to the administrator of the family tree on the MyHeritage website, whereas of the Sarah Tal. After about half an hour of searching on Facebook, I found Sarah's son Boaz Tal. I got in touch with him for correspondence and asked what he knew. Also communicated simultaneously with his wife, Mira. It turned out that Mikhail Laufer was indeed Sarah Tal and Zygfryd Puf was Joseph Tal. They got married in 1936 and upon arrival in Israel they changed their names and surnames. Probably that was done for safety reasons, as they immigrated just before the start of the Second World War. I also learned about Mikhail's two sisters named Edka and Tova. Joseph and Sarah also helped that immigrate to Israel in 1937. Joseph himself moved a few years earlier. I also found many relatives along the line of my great-grandmother Leah Semel and her husband Aaron, who had 10 brothers and sisters in the family, as well as their ancestor from around 1820. Several signs of a native brother were also discovered, such as a marriage certificate in the family Shlomo Laufer, Marcus Mordechai, with Hannah Rachel Nadler. On the Billion Graves website I found the graves of Edka Laufer, Sarah Tal and Joseph Tal. By the way, Edka's monument states that her parents were Shlomo and Karina Krinchi. In just 2 months, I found over 200 relatives, starting from my great-great-great-grandparents on both lines and ending with practically all close relatives of my grandfather. Can I say that I'm satisfied with the investigation and leave everything as it is? Of course not. I know nothing about the parents of my great-grandfather Abraham Laufer and great-grandmother Malka Henny Axelrod. I haven't found all the children of Edka and Tava Laufer in Israel. In the document on the Yad Vashem website, it states that Abraham's wife is Lubsza, not Malka. There is no Also a record of immigration to the USA on the statueofliberty.org website for Alla Laufer in 1906, since my great-grandfather was born in 1886 and his younger brother Marcus in 1901. It is quite possible that Babsi was Abraham's first wife and Malka-Heni was the second. Babsi is also from Lubsza, as indicated on the website. You have found ancestors and living relatives. What is next? Contact archives and obtain documentary evidence, archival certificates. With this you can prove your affiliation to a particular ethnic group and obtain citizenships of that country or a similar document. Write to your distant relatives, communicate with them. Sometimes it can be very exciting. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see research on other families on the channel, subscribe to Gmail and give likes. Perhaps you want to find your distant relatives, then contact us in the comments or submit a search request on our website genealogical.top. The preliminary search service is completely free. We will check for possible mentions of the person you are looking for in all databases. After that, we will contact you to discuss the next steps in the search. Thank you for watching and good luck in finding your ancestors.